Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just dive right in, shall we? Picture this. It's 8 a.m. in Tokyo, you're down in the subway, and it is just this suffocating, silent ocean of black suits. The crush of people is so intense, the exhaustion is so palpable, you can literally feel the weight of 14 million people pressing down on you. But then you drive just a couple of hours out into the mountains of Shikoku or Tohoku, and wow, the contrast is totally jarring. You're trading that intense city crush for this haunting, abandoned silence. The only thing you hear is the wind rattling against the aluminum shutters of totally empty schools. So today, we're unpacking a really radical government program designed to bridge that massive gap. And we're asking a tough question. Can money actually buy back a dying countryside? Stick with me here, because what is happening in Japan right now, it's basically a sneak preview of the demographic cliff facing the rest of the developed world. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this, we've got to start in a place called Nagoro Village. Picture the local bus stop there. It still has the schedule taped to the cracked glass, right? But the paper is all yellowed out. And get this, nobody has caught a bus from this stop since 2012. Instead, you've got this unblinking, life-size doll of a grandmother just waiting permanently on the bench. She's in a faded blue coat, holding an empty shopping bag. And the craziest part? She is just one of over 350 similar scarecrows placed all throughout the valley. Which brings us to a pretty profound, honestly kind of unsettling question. Why on earth are there more life-size dolls than living people in places like Nagoro? Now, this micro-story about a woman named Ayano Tsukimi who actually sews these scarecrows to replace her neighbors as they pass away, it's really the face of Japan's macro problem, and that is a terminal demographic collapse. I mean, this isn't some quirky Halloween display. This is a country watching its entire rural foundation quietly evaporate. To really grasp why this is happening, we have to look at the math that's quite literally keeping Japan's prime minister awake at night. In 2023, the number of newborns in Japan fell below 800,000. That is the very first time on record it has ever dropped that low. To put that into perspective for you, back in the early 1970s, Japan was seeing over 2 million births a year. So they call this the 2030 problem. That's the year the absolute last of the baby boomers turned 75. You can have this shrinking workforce facing a massive elderly population, and the healthcare and pension systems, they are going to be pushed to the absolute brink. And you know, the visceral, physical reality of that math is just staggering. We aren't just talking about an aging society here. We're talking about physical erasure. Since the year 2000, over 10,000 entire villages have completely vanished off the map. Gone. They didn't just shrink a little bit. The post office closed up, the last elderly resident passed away, and the village name was literally scrubbed from the map. It's basically an extinction event for rural life. So, facing this reality, the government in Tokyo understandably hit the panic button. And their countermeasure? It's pretty radical. They are literally paying people hard cash to abandon the megacities. Basically, they designated 1,300 municipalities as doomed, but, maybe salvageable. If you pack up and leave the Tokyo sprawl for one of these areas, you get 1 million yen. That's about $6,700 per person. You get another million per child, plus up to 2 million yen just for home renovations. So a family of 4 could rake in over $20,000 just for packing their bags. Sounds like an absolute dream, right? Getting free money to ditch the rat race. But there is a massive catch. You have to commit to staying for 5 years, or you have to pay every single yen back. Okay, so here is the really uncomfortable truth hidden in the data. Between 2019 and 2023, only 7,000 people actually took this moving subsidy. Keep in mind, the government's goal was 10,000 people a year. So they hit just a tiny fraction of that target. And it actually gets worse. A full 1/3 of the people who did take the money, they ended up packing up and returning to Tokyo before their 5 years were even up. They mostly cited overwhelming loneliness and just a total lack of basic services. To understand exactly why they leave, we really have to look at the human reality on the ground. Meet Yashiro Yamada. He's an 82-year-old farmer from Niigata Prefecture, and he's actually the last full-time rice farmer in his little hamlet of 12 houses. He watches these city folks arrive with their subsidy money, they take their gorgeous photos of the rice terraces, and then winter hits. Suddenly, they're staring down 3 hours of shoveling snow every single morning. The pipes freeze over. The nearest hospital is a 45-minute drive away. As Yamada puts it, if just one family stayed, I would teach them, but they don't stay. The physical shock, combined with the extreme isolation, it's just way too much for most people. Which brings us to a really crucial point. This financial incentive has a massive hidden trapdoor. And it's all about the housing. See, Japan has over 8 million abandoned homes. They call them akiya. Now, a lot of these are listed online for practically nothing. Some are literally being given away for free. But here's the reality check. A 200-year-old empty farmhouse comes with rotting thatch roofs, serious termite damage, absolutely zero insulation, and some incredibly hazardous 1970s electrical wiring. Getting that fixed up costs upwards of 15 million yen. So that 2 million yen renovation subsidy from the government, it barely even makes a dent. For average working-class folks, this so-called free rural life actually turns into a massive financial sinkhole. When you really look at it, the difference between the villages that survive and the ones that don't boils down to one single thing: the ecosystem. Take Nanmoku, for instance. They bought these flashy subway ads in Tokyo yelling free land, but they didn't do anything else. The schools are closing, there's no local clinic, and the few newcomers that do show up just leave because there's no support system. Now, flip over to Kamikatsu. They didn't just throw cash at the problem. They offered these trial workations so people could come test the waters completely risk-free for a month. They subsidized childcare. They built a shared community purpose around zero-waste living. The takeaway here? Financial incentives totally fail if there's no living ecosystem to back them up. But if you lower the risk with a trial period, those villages actually stand a fighting chance. And Kamiyama offers us a radically different and actually successful alternative. They didn't just sit around waiting for Tokyo's subsidy checks to arrive. Instead, a group of local entrepreneurs bought up an abandoned elementary school. They managed to convince the local government to lay high-speed fiber optic cable right through the mountains, and they transformed that school into this booming co-working space. Today, you've got cloud architects and designers living in these beautiful old farmhouses for like $200 a month. Kamiyama is living proof that building digital bridges, fast internet and a ready-made community, is vastly more effective than just throwing cash at people. Now, we have to be completely honest here. This is not some flawless, perfectly harmonious utopia. These success stories generate some intense cultural friction. Over in Kamiyama, the elderly locals who've spent their whole lives farming, they look at these newcomers with a lot of suspicion. I mean, the new folks speak standard Tokyo Japanese, they order takeout, and they don't have the first clue how to weed a rice paddy. At town meetings, you'll have locals wanting to fix bridges using traditional materials, while the young remote workers are pushing for modern steel. One exhausted local official summed it up perfectly. He said, "They are two Japans in one room." Let's take a step back for a second and look at the broader demographic reality here. The hard, totally impartial math shows that just shuffling Japanese citizens from the city out to the country is kind of like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. To actually keep its working-age population stable, Japan needs roughly 600,000 immigrants every single year. But culturally and politically, Japan has been historically resistant to this. Right now, they're accepting only about 200,000 a year. So that gap is just massive, and honestly, it's the giant elephant in the room of this entire repopulation debate. However, in the places where that gap is actually being bridged, the results are pretty undeniable. Just look at the towns of Oizumi and Sho. Oizumi was essentially a dying rural town until it embraced a large influx of Brazilian-Japanese immigrants. Today, over 20% of the town's population is of Brazilian descent. They've got Brazilian supermarkets, bilingual schools, and a really booming local economy. Then you have Sho, which revived itself simply because a local factory was desperate for workers. They hired 40 Vietnamese trainees who ended up staying, getting married, buying homes, and quite literally refilling the local elementary school. No government subsidies were needed. They saved themselves strictly through economic necessity and immigration. And that is a lesson that certainly applies far beyond Japan's borders. So what's the ultimate takeaway from all this? Well, when you go and ask the rural locals themselves what actually works, they don't say, "Oh, we need more cash." No, they say they need reliable infrastructure and specifically high-speed internet. They need local jobs and business grants, not just a one-off check for moving. They've also noticed that the most successful migrants are usually former rural residents moving back in their 40s or remote workers who are already bringing in their own salaries. But above all else, every single surviving village has one obsessed, incredibly dedicated local champion. Maybe it's a retired teacher or just a stubborn farmer, someone who absolutely refuses to let the village die. The government subsidy can definitely support that champion, but it cannot create them out of thin air. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to take us right back to where we started. Back to Nagoro Village and back to Ayano Tsukimi, the woman making the scarecrows. Ayano actually refused the government subsidy. Why? Well, there was literally no one left in her hamlet to even sign the paperwork. In a really haunting letter, she revealed that she's preparing for her own inevitable absence. She wrote, I made a scarecrow for myself, so that when I am gone, there will still be a Tsukimi waiting at the bus stop. Which leaves us with this final, honestly pretty provocative thought to take away. The government's own data projects that 90% of rural Japan will eventually be abandoned. They're in pure triage mode right now. So we really have to ask, is this multi-billion yen program actually a genuine cure meant to reverse the tide? Or is it simply a deeply human, desperate attempt to just buy a little more time? Just so these villages and the people who built them don't have to wait for the end entirely alone. It's a huge question, and not just for Japan, but for the entire aging world. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.